the largest court system in the world. And the judges are extremely focused on keeping jurors, since they have to summon, and I think they about 500,000 jurors a day, or it's not that much, but it's a huge number of jurors in order to service the vast amount of courthouses throughout our system. And so they want to be able to have, because if they don't use that juror in a day, they lose the juror for a year. So a lot of times, I find it's important in designing a questionnaire and talking to the judge is making sure that the judge knows really what the usefulness of it is. And for the most part these days, unless it's an extraordinary case, you really don't need a 10, 15-page questionnaire. Quite frankly, most questionnaires can be distilled down to really necessary questions. Those core questions that really are what, as I mentioned before, the decision drivers in this case, which is what are the core questions that you just absolutely have to know that go to bias and that go to jurors' preferences, life experiences, and beliefs and opinions that will drive the case. So a lot of those questionnaires can be done in a page. Now, obviously, there's a little bit more background information that would be nice, but most questionnaires really can be accomplished in 3 to 5 pages. Now, if you structure them right, if you widen the margins out, and if you make the fonts slightly smaller, you can sometimes condense it down even in 2 to 3 pages, which then becomes so much easier to copy, and then you create a jury selection plan for the judge. And that's actually, I find, critical, because what's important early on in the case is to actually start conditioning the judges to your existent positions on what you want to accomplish. Because judges typically obviously don't like to make don't like to grant cause challenges. So early on, you want to start setting up a jury selection plan, both with the other side. Now, this is a time where you want to get along with the other side. A jury selection plan which includes questionnaire, an expedient way to do it, an expedient way to copy it, and to distribute it among the people so that they can get it all accomplished. But more importantly, you want the judge to start being aware of what you think are the core issues that you're really going to think go to bias in the case, and how you want them to start making decisions on these cause challenges. You want them to be sensitive already to what you see as a problem. In your case, Your Honor, we are very concerned that people who've had negative experiences with contractors or negative homeowners experiences really are going to have a hard time in this case. So we want to ask questions in the questionnaire and in voir dire to find out really if there are some strong feelings there. This lets the judge know that you're tracking on those issues so that when you then issue a cause challenge on a particular juror, they're not surprised. They're already conditioned to that's where the issue is, and hopefully they become more receptive and more lenient to the cause challenge. So creating a jury selection plan which is done with the judge ahead of time, making everybody aware what are the issues that you're tracking on this, just makes good sense. I believe that a lot of times, there's a lot of mystique about jury selection, and how do you interpret body language, and how do you, really get inside a juror's heads. And I believe that you really have to take the most fundamental, easiest approach to jury selection that you can, which is identify the issues, ask the right questions, and get the jurors to talk. And there's some things that if you do that, a lot of times you can bypass a lot of this mystery and a lot of this guessing about, from this twitch in this juror or this blink of this juror, they somehow told you that they weren't ready for the case. Now, this isn't to say that nonverbal body language is not important, because it is very important to track overall, how that juror is in the courtroom, how they're responding to you and your clients, what's their sort of mental condition. Because the more I do this, and I probably spent 10 days in jury selection this month, just looking at jurors, just listening to them answer questions, it's really more of a sensibility that you're looking for. Characteristics, life experiences, attitudes do tell you a lot and are hugely important. But a lot of it is sort of how they're going to make decisions in your case. And that's another thing that I find is important to track, is really how do they like to make decisions? And you can actually ask jurors this simple question. When it comes to an important decision in your life, sending your child to school, um, uh, picking a school, buying a car, buying a house, how do you tend to like how do you like to make those decisions? And from that, you find out somebody who likes to analyze all the details, somebody who likes to get a gut impression, a gut feel for something. Um, and it just tells you a lot about sort of how they like to make decisions. So that's an element that I would never underestimate, is really how jurors are, how they like to make decisions. Now I'm going to refer to my notes for a second and go on, since this is turning into a longer lecture. Um, One of the things that I find that is not done nearly enough in jury selection is we tend to focus on individual jurors instead of looking at the whole panel. And there's two things that are important about that you can do during voir dire. Now, voir dire is important because one of the things that we tend to do is to go juror by juror asking them questions. One of the things that would be great, that I find is great to do, is to target what you would consider to be a fairly talkative juror, a gregarious juror, and get them talking on a particular issue in the case. In other words, in your particular case, well, what do you think of the duties of a homeowner to know and understand, the weaknesses or the construction defaults in their own home? What do you think about that, juror? And get that juror to wax rhapsodic about their knowledge, their feelings, their experiences about that. And then instead of just saying thank you and then moving on to the next juror, you say to another juror on the panel, juror number 7, how do you feel about what juror number 4 says? And juror number 12, how do you think about what juror number 4 and juror number 7? They have slightly different opinions on this. And you start playing the jurors off of each other in terms of their opinions. Now, the most important element of that is that you are actually trying to recreate a deliberation in your voir dire. It tells you a lot about how jurors are going to interact with each other, how jurors are going to say, okay, I believe that. I think I believe in that opinion. Someone who's going to be more of a follower versus someone who's going to push and say, I agree to a certain extent with juror number 4, but you know what? I think this. They're going to push against that. That's somebody who's going to vie for a little bit of power in deliberations. It's important to create that dynamic to let you know really what kind of jury panel you're looking for, who's going to fit in. Second aspect of the panel dynamic is that a lot of attorneys get focused on the individual juror. Is that person going to be good or bad for my case? And the problem with that is that a lot of times you stop. Here in California, we have backstriking, so you can stop and look at how your whole panel is. And even though you may look at the panel and say, juror number 6 is bad juror for me, but on the whole, they're not an opinion leader. In other words, they're not going to move other jurors. So you may say, gee whiz, I've got 4 jurors up there who are actually okay. And if I keep striking, at least here in California, the other side may strike off some of my good jurors. I may hold